In the last video I talked about the basic building blocks, and I said that a field is where values can be actualized, but then I used the little word can, which says that something is possible, but what does it mean that something is possible? In philosophy we use the term modality to express that something can be either possible, impossible or necessary, but what does it mean that something is possible, impossible or necessary? Maybe you think it's easy to answer. Possible means that it can happen, impossible means that it can't happen, or necessary means that it must happen. But that's just using another word for the same. So if we want to understand more deeply, what is it that makes something possible or impossible or necessary? You might ask yourself what you think. Several philosophers will say that the modal structures of the world, they are irreducible and unexplainable. It's just a basic building block that we need to include in our worldview, whereas I'm going to suggest in this video that it can be explained and reduced to something else. The topic is relevant both for what we're going to say later about free will and about mathematics and about the origin of the world. But it's an interesting topic also on its own. So, what I'm suggesting is that we need to make a distinction between three types of possibility, impossibility and necessity, and that is logical, physical and metaphysical. So to give examples of each, that something is logically possible means that when you describe this within a theoretical framework, it is consistent. Then it's logically possible. If it's logically impossible, it's inconsistent. But if it's logically necessary, it means that it's inconsistent to deny. So for example, it's logically possible that John is a bachelor. Well, it's logically impossible that a bachelor is married, and it's logically necessary that a bachelor is unmarried, because it will be inconsistent to deny that a bachelor is unmarried. If we say that something is physically possible, it means that it can be as it is or happen as it does because of the laws of nature and states of affairs in our universe. So now instead of saying be as it is and happen as it does, I'll just say be or happen for short. So that it's physically impossible means that it cannot be or happen because of laws of nature and states of affairs in our universe, and that it's physically necessary means that it cannot not be or happen because of laws of nature and states of affairs in our universe. So for example, it's physically possible for a car to move faster than a horse. It's physically impossible for a car to move faster than light, and it's physically necessary for the car to move slower than light. So this is both because of what the car is and what the horse is, the states of affairs, and the laws of nature guiding how things move around. We'll talk more about laws of nature in the next video. That something is metaphysically possible means that it can be as it is or happen as it does because of the fundamental structures of the world. So that it's metaphysically impossible means that it cannot be or happen because of the fundamental structures of the world. And that it's metaphysically necessary means that it cannot not be or happen because of the fundamental structures of the world. But here people will of course disagree with what the fundamental structures of the world are. And then they will give different examples. But let's say, for example, that you believe that everything that exists is physical. Then you will say, well, it's metaphysically possible that there are chairs, but it's metaphysically impossible that there are ghosts, and it's metaphysically necessary that everything is physical. Sometimes people use the term epistemic possibility. That just means that they're uncertain about whether this is metaphysically or physically or logically possible, impossible or necessary. So it's just a way of saying maybe it is one or the other, but I don't know. Then there's the distinction between type and token physical possibility, which we need later when we come to free will. So the distinction between type and token is to say that something is of the same type if it has the same structure, but it can be different tokens if they occur at different times or places. So for instance, I can have three very similar chairs and or identical chairs even, type identical, which means that there are three chairs, but there's just one type chair. Three token chairs, one type chair. Or I can say chair, chair, chair. And then it's one type, the word chair, but it's three tokens because I said the word three times, three different times. never mind that distinction here. What we need is just to make a distinction between that it's sometimes physically possible for a person to do something here and now, and we can distinguish that from whether it's possible in general. Because it might be that it's possible for me in general to open a door, but it's not token physically possible for me here and now to open that door. Maybe something is happening in my brain making it the case that I won't open the door, or the universe is determined so that it was impossible for me to open that door now, even if I can in general open doors. So that's a useful distinction that we'll return to when we come to the topic of free will. There's also a distinction between narrow and wide possibility, which in where the narrow possibility means that it's possible for me for the time being now, or at the point of time we're talking about. But this can be distinguished between something which is impossible now but could be possible in the future. So for instance, I can say, well, it's not possible for me to play the guitar, or not possible for me to speak Italian, because I can't play the guitar or speak Italian, so it's impossible for me here and now. But it is possible in the future that I learn to play the guitar, or learn to speak Italian. But it's not possible for me in the future to learn to fly faster than light, etc. Now I've given a lot of examples of different types, but what's common to all of these different kinds that makes them all examples of modality? How should we understand modality in general? Well, what is common to all of them is that we have some presuppositions, and we say that given these presuppositions, we can then describe in a theoretical framework what's possible, impossible, or implied in these presuppositions. And it can be physical or metaphysical or semantical presuppositions. So let's have a look at it again. If it's physical modalities, then the presuppositions are the laws of nature in the universe. So describe something consistent with them, and it's physically possible. Something inconsistent, and it's physically impossible. Or implied by the laws, it's physically necessary. And I gave the examples with the car that it's possible for it to drive slower than light, but not possible to drive faster than light. Necessary that it moves slower than light. When it comes to metaphysical modalities, then the presupposition is a hypothesis about the fundamental structures of the world. Something, of course, is the actual fundamental structure of the world and tells us what the actual metaphysical modalities are, but since we don't know that for sure, we just say that by hypothesis we think this or that is metaphysically possible or impossible. And then, given the hypothesis is the presupposition, and then we say, well, cars are possible, but ghosts are impossible. When it comes to logical modalities, the presuppositions are the meaning of terms. So if you describe something consistent with the meaning of terms, it's possible, logically possible. Inconsistent with it, it's logically impossible. Or if it's deductively implied by the meaning of the terms, then it is logically necessary. And again, I gave the example with bachelor. When we have this understanding of modality, we can also understand how we use modal terms in a lot of other contexts, because we can do that in law or ethics or chess, games, etc. We can say that something is possible or impossible or necessary, and then we will have different presuppositions, like for instance the law or ethics or the rules of chess, and then we can say what's consistent or inconsistent or implied with these presuppositions. So for instance, given the rules of chess then, it will be possible for the queen to move sideways, it's impossible for the queen to move like the horse, and it's necessary for the queen to be at d1 or d8 from the start. If modality is about whether something is consistent or inconsistent or implied by the conditions, we could ask, what if there are no conditions? At the beginning of time in the world, is it possible to talk about what is possible, impossible, or necessary then? And I mentioned this because we'll return to it when we talk about the origin of the world in the last chapter. And then I will note that this widest possible sense of possibility is that something is possible in the sense of being non-impossible. We can say in the broader sense of possible that when I say that this is possible, I mean that it's not impossible. Some philosophers argue that dispositions is a fundamental part of the world that we can, or a basic building block that we can use to describe and explain everything else. for instance, Stephen Mumford, and we'll return to this again in the next video. But I argue that if we have this understanding of modality that I presented, then dispositions are superfluous, or they can be reduced to what I've said about physical possibility, what is consistent given the laws of nature. Because when we're talking about disposition of a thing, we say what is physically possible for that thing to do, or what can happen to it given the structure of that thing. People who say that a vase has the disposition to be broken, or sugar has the disposition to be absorbed in water, etc. But if we have our understanding of physical possibility, it doesn't add anything to say, well, in addition we have disposition, or it doesn't make anything simpler, or it is not helpful in any other way. So we do not need to add it as a basic component to our ontology. We can reduce it to physical possibility. What I've argued in this video then is that both modality and dispositions can be reduced, because when you have the basic building blocks, the field with the values and the actualizer, then modality is just a matter of what is consistent or inconsistent or implied in either the fundamental building blocks or results of these, because the fundamental building blocks, as we see, they can turn into a universe, or they can turn into a language, or they can turn into a game of chess, etc. And we can talk about these results of the basic building blocks as presuppositions and ask what is consistent, inconsistent, or implied with these presuppositions, and then that will be what we mean by modality. We don't need to add modality as an extra part of our worldview. So that's what I argued in this video.